Democratic Alliance's Dr. Mpho Phalatse has made history being the first woman mayor in the city of Johannesburg in modern history. She joins me now for more on these developments. It hasn't even been 24 hours since you've been now elected the mayor of Johannesburg. How would you describe the past 24 hours?
Oh, it's been crazy. I mean, we went into council yesterday morning not knowing what would transpire. We didn't have a majority. We only had 71 seats. Of the 71, 2 of our councillors had moved on, 1 to parliament, 1 to province. So we were 2 men down. We only had 69 votes of 270. So we were nowhere near a majority. We had not managed to secure any coalition agreements with any other party. So we just went in, we decided we're going to field our own candidates, and that's how we went into council. And to our surprise, we saw a very strange pattern. But we saw it quite early on. You know, it started in other parts of the country, and we saw that it's becoming a pattern where certain parties were beginning to vote with the Democratic Alliance or vote for Democratic Alliance candidates. And so there was an expectation, but you can never be sure until it happens, because each area is different. We're in Johannesburg, it's the economic hub of the country, so when you don't understand what's playing out, you can never really say what happened in Knysna will happen in Johannesburg. So lots of uncertainty yesterday, right until the very end. I mean, my election was very late at night. I think I got home around 1 a.m. And yes, I was voted in, to my surprise still. I think it's still sinking in. I spent my first day at the Metro Center. Of course, we need to transition very quickly into the new term of office. We don't want to waste time. And with the complexities of us being a minority government, we need to think very cautiously about how we're going to bring about stability in the city.
You call it complexity. Many of the analysts I've been talking to in the last day, especially post-election, call it something that will be short-lived. How much of that is hanging over your head?
I don't think so at all. I think a lot of it depends on what we do with the opportunity. And, you know, there's a very real opportunity here to bring stability in the city. And the voters have placed us in this position. The voters are saying to us as political parties, we don't want any one of you to have a majority. We don't want you to take us for granted. You know, we want to keep you on your toes, and we want you to work together because you all represent different constituencies, you represent different ideologies, and we want you to find each other and govern the city. And I think it's a real challenge that the voters have given us. It's not insurmountable. It's something that can be achieved. We already have a sense of which parties are almost aligned to us in terms of values and principles. There may be slight differences here and there, but there's very much a possibility of us finding each other and being able to work together. So the task going forward is to create stability. Joburg needs that. We know what happened in the last term. Very tumultuous 5 years, a collapse of the initial coalition government at the 3-year term, and in the last 2 years we had 3 executive mayors, 3 administrations, lots of moving parts. We don't want that in the next coming 5 years, and it's really on us as political parties to make that stability happen.
So just this weekend we had the majority of opposition parties coming out to speak very strongly against the DA, saying the party was behaving in an arrogant manner by having walked out of those negotiation talks and really saw itself as being different to what they were. Now that you find yourself in this position, is your attitude towards the negotiations with other parties going to change?
Well, I mean, the attitude you're talking about was a perceived attitude. The Democratic Alliance has always been very honest about how we're going to approach any coalition negotiations. We've always been honest about values and principles. We've been honest about non-negotiables as well. And that's how we entered the negotiations. Now, the bone of contention with the fallout that happened before yesterday was around the mayorship of Johannesburg, as far as I'm concerned. And that was really based on, again, an interpretation of a principle or differences of approach. We believe in following empirical evidence or international best practice. As a Democratic Alliance, we know internationally it's best practice that in a coalition, the party that has the majority seats will then get mayorship, and that was our principle. We've communicated it over and over, and in some coalitions where we don't have majority, we've given mayorship to the party that has majority. So we've stayed true to that principle throughout the elections or throughout the negotiation phase. And we wanted to stay true to that principle in Johannesburg as well. We were honest about it. We never lied about it. We never raised expectations. I think when a deviation was requested, what the delegation said was they would go back to the FedEx and see if the FedEx is willing to accede to that deviation. And when the FedEx did not exceed, that was the position.
But is that not part of the process of negotiations, that there are some concessions that will have to be made? And part of the reason why I bring this up is that just this morning, one of your leaders, Helen Zille, was saying that it's still a non-option for the DA to work together with the EFF. So what then becomes your plan practically as the mayor of the City of Johannesburg for how you are going to be passing budgets, how you're going to be passing bylaws, making whatever changes that you need to make in order to be effective in your council without their vote? What are your other options?
So what we need is to seek consensus. If you talk about budgets, for instance, we've got wards. The ANC has wards. Service delivery needs to happen across the board. When you pass a budget, you don't pass it only for your wards, you pass it for the entire city. We saw a situation in Johannesburg in the last budget cycle where the DA voted with the ANC on the budget to pass the budget. It was a budget that was agreed upon by both parties. There was robust consultation and agreement on certain deliverables that needed to be reflected in that budget. And we can go forward with the same.
So does that mean ultimately going forward, you are not looking to consolidate the support that has been freely given to you by way of the voting that has taken place now, and that in fact you're going to be looking at whether or not you can form some kind of allegiances with the ANC to support you in the votes because you think that might be more stable?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I am saying is when it comes to passing the budget, the rule is you need 50% plus one to pass the budget. What that means is in Joburg, where you've got 270 seats, you need 136 votes to pass the budget. Now, you don't necessarily have to rely on coalitions. There are many ways around it, but it does not mean that we're not going to look at the possibility of forming a stable coalition. But it does not mean that should that not happen, or should we not have a majority coalition, because as much as we want to form a coalition, even the one you're talking about, where the talks were happening before the election yesterday, it was not a majority coalition because we never had 136 votes combined. The parties that were in talks, I think, had 122 votes, but they were still going to form a minority coalition, which means come budget passing time, they would still need to reach out beyond themselves to get support to pass the budget. And those are the two principles at play. We can still negotiate with smaller parties, and we will be doing that. We'll be negotiating with other parties and seeing if there are parties we can work with in a formalized coalition.
Does that include the EFF?
Well, the values and principles test is where we're struggling, where the EFF is concerned. So when we were in government, there were things we agreed with. For instance, we extended hours of service in clinics. The EFF agreed, we agreed with that. We didn't agree with land invasions, as an example. The EFF agreed with land invasions. We vehemently opposed to land invasions. And so there are areas of agreement, there's areas of disagreement. Can we work in a coalition? I don't think so. I don't think we can have a formalized coalition with the EFF. I do think there can be areas where we see eye to eye and we can drive things. The mobile clinics, which I drove under my leadership as the MMC for Health, the extension of service hours, those things that we agree on, we can certainly drive. But should there be areas where we don't agree, we as the Democratic Alliance will not compromise for the sake of staying in government. If those areas will be a make or break, then unfortunately we'll have to stay on the side of principle to safeguard the well-being of our city and its residents.
By the looks of things, the parties that voted yesterday, that voted for you as the DA candidate and even the DA speaker, went into the day with a strategy. So from the outside looking in, there is political strategy at play. And right now it is not necessarily the DA strategy. Because like you said, you were surprised that things have happened to be what they are. Have you started formulating what your strategy in all of this is going to be?
Definitely, but I don't think it's also correct to say that all the parties had a strategy. There was some horse trading going on throughout the day, particularly where the smaller parties are concerned. I definitely think the EFF had a strategy, and I think their strategy is to unseat the ANC and not necessarily to vote for the DA. So, you know, we're very clear on, we don't want to deceive ourselves into thinking the EFF decided we're going to vote for the DA. We understand that the EFF decided we're going to unseat the ANC, and they looked at what is on offer and they decided to support the Democratic Alliance. I don't think the smaller parties were part of that strategy. I think they saw, just like us, how things started playing out in other parts of the country, and they started putting two and two together, and you saw people starting to gravitate towards each other, starting to talk about what can happen. So
whatever the configurations may be, I think the point still remains that there's a strategy at play. And right now, you find yourself in the middle of somebody else's political strategy, and you don't know what their next move could well be, where exactly, what exactly the end game is. Yes, it could be moving the ANC out, but one certainly does not think that that's the beginning and the end of it. And so from your perspective as the mayor, how do you plan on saying, okay, well, this is where I find myself. This is what I'm going to do to ensure that I'm stable in this position, and that tomorrow, should I be voted out, I'm not again the victim of somebody else's political strategy?
Yeah, well, I've already spoken to my strategy. I've said that we will be collaborating, consulting widely with all political parties. I have said that I don't think we can have a formalized coalition agreement with the EFF because we've got really diametrically opposed views of how we should approach development. There are areas where we've been able to work together before, and if there are such areas, we will continue to work together. In terms of service delivery, we'll make sure all 135 wards of the city are taken care of, whether they're DA wards or non-DA wards. We will consult even outside of the parties that voted with us. And that's the example I gave, that we know that the ANC did not vote with us because they tabled their own candidates every single time. But we're also aware that they've got wards in the city that need services, and therefore there's an opportunity there to look at, come budget time, how do we pass budgets so that we take care of all constituents in the city. So on the one hand, yes, we will look at possibly forming coalition agreements with parties that we are aligned with in terms of values and principles. Where that does not happen, we will look at where we can find each other so that we stabilize the city and continue to render services.
Are you going to be taking the lead in that process in the interests of the people of the City of Johannesburg?
Most.
Or are you going to be waiting to hear what the national leadership of the DA may say? And the reason I ask that question is that we know that how local politics plays itself out is not always in line with what the national imperative might be. So what's your approach going to be?
So we need to differentiate between the post-election phase, where coalition agreements were happening between different parties, mostly at a national level, because coalitions would play out in different municipalities as we are seeing now, and an instance where now an executive mayor has been elected, which is the case now. I need to now take over and provide leadership, and that's what will be happening. So yes, I will be putting a team together today already, and we will be starting tomorrow with those consultations to see what type of government we can put together going forward. I'll definitely be taking the lead on that. I've negotiated and had consultation with our national leadership. That happened today. We've agreed on do's and don'ts and parameters, which is very important. It's important to know where you're not willing to compromise, and I've spoke about our values and our principles, and it's important to also look at different permutations as possibilities and know what you're going into those consultations with as an offer as you go and approach other possible partners.
All right, let's leave it there for tonight. Mpho Phalatse is the newly elected mayor of Johannesburg, and as you heard, she's going to be be reaching out to all of the other parties in the city to ensure that she forms what will be a very stable government, and hopefully that she'll be able to stay in this position long enough to make a difference.